This is my heater. I dare you to hit it.
You'll be sorry.
You want the heater? I'll give it to you.
Basketball, maybe they don't hit it.
A swing and a drive to deep right.
Clear the deck. Cannonball coming.
Left field. It is out of here.
All right, we are back. Baseball Unstitched. Hope everybody is doing well. Flax and I got some fun things to talk to you guys about today, and as always, it's all baseball. So if you came here for something other than baseball, you picked the wrong space. Flax, how you been? How things going?
Good. Episode 7. We're here. We're almost to that 9-episode mark that your dad wants us to get to. So we're flying high.
I like the sound of that. And we're jumping right into it today this year, guys. We've got a really good show put together here for you. Talking about Pete Alonso and the situation that is him with the Mets. Does he deserve the money that they've offered him as recently as potentially this year? We know he got offered a contract extension last year. We're going to go into some high leverage arms, as that's something that hasn't come off the free agents list yet. But instead of talking about the free agents that could come off, we'd like to talk to you guys a little bit more about some guys who are already rostered, who are going to have continually increasing roles, or maybe have already had their role increased to the back end of the bullpen. We'll do a little will they, won't they at the end of this show. We're going to bring that back. And then, of course, final thoughts. But let's get into it. As always, Flax, what happened in baseball from a Moose perspective over the last couple of days?
Yeah, not as much as the week previous, but within the last 7 days, we did see some guys sign with some different teams. Trevor Williams back with Washington, 2-year, $14 million deal. I like that move a lot for Washington. They think there's some more to get out of him. Charlie Morton, 41-year-old, 1 year, $15 million with Baltimore. Should be a nice depth piece for them. Josh Bell, 1 year, $6 million, back to Washington. Again, other good moves that they're making right now that, for all those Nats fans out there, I don't believe Mike Rizzo is asleep at the wheel. Josh Rojas, 1 year for an undisclosed amount as of yet to the White Sox. Caleb Thielbar, 1 year, $2.75 million to the Cubs, a good bullpen arm. And Hae-Sung Kim, coming out of the KBO in Korea, 5 years, $22 million to the Los Angeles Dodgers on a 3-year plus 2 mutual options with the potential of reaching up to that $22 million point. So a lot of moves, a lot of signings, hoping for more this week.
So today, the Pete Alonso situation is super interesting, and we really wanted to get into this for you guys. One of the most prolific home run hitters over the last 6 seasons, totaling at 226 home runs since he stepped onto a major league field. He's a guy that you would expect this deep into the offseason already has a contract. There's a lot of things to be looked into here. We know that the Mets want to bring him back, but obviously they're a team that likes to blow away the luxury tax, so I'm sure they have a number that they're looking for. You'd think that there would be more teams heavily involved in a guy with that type of home run production. So we wanted to do a couple different things for you guys here. And that's pretty simple. One, we know that the Mets have offered Pete Alonso at least once in 2023 and potentially here in 2024. We're going to go into whether or not the AAVs of those deals are fair for Pete Alonso against some comparable guys. We'll talk about who those are here momentarily. The next thing that we want to do is we want to talk about how he compares to those high-profile first basemen from a standpoint of offense. Because when you look at your corner infielders, you're normally talking about offense. Normally. Because the third thing we're going to go into here, and Flax is going to deep dive into this, is everybody in the world believes Pete Alonso is a horrible first baseman. We'd like to make the argument that almost everybody in the world who thinks that, because it's not actually everybody in the world, actually might be wrong. So we're going to go into those 3 facts, and we're hoping that you guys enjoy this little segment of how we break down Pete Alonso. As publicized, we do know that in 2023, the New York Mets offered Pete Alonso a 7-year, $158 million extension, which would be a $22.5 million AAV. And if we broke that down to a 6-year contract extension, which it seems like most guys are looking for in this current market, it'd be around $135 million. Additionally, It's been speculated that here during the offseason in 2024, the Mets offered him a 3-year, $90 million deal with some sort of opt-out within that contract. The years make a big difference here, and I want to throw that over to Flax to discuss with you why those are important.
Yeah, and it's a theme we're seeing across Major League Baseball right now. The three biggest bats that exist on the board still, Alex Bregman, Anthony Santander, Pete Alonso, they're all 30 years old. They're all looking for 6-year contracts, and they're not really receiving it, at least not at the dollar value that they're all looking for. The 3-year, $90 million deal to me is the New York Mets as an organization understanding who Pete Alonso is to the fan base, to the team, saying, we want you here, we want to pay you to be here, but for the long-term plan of the younger core that they have, they understand that if they can get the most out of Pete Alonso within that span, great. If not, there's other guys on the market that they can go get. Again, there's multiple opt-outs within this. If Vlad Guerrero Jr. is on the table next offseason, if he hasn't signed an extension or if he's willing to sit down with the Mets, they don't have to pick up that option with Pete Alonso, and they could go pay a guy who they are more willing to sink 6 or 7 years into. For Pete, he's 30 years old, just like the other two, and he wants the job security for the next 6 years. Weighing all of this and having Pete Alonso try and land on the contract that he wants, considering there hasn't been a lot of chatter from other teams around the league for him, is why we really want to talk through today why we think he's a higher value than maybe the Mets are even seeing him for an extended period of time. So, I mean, we're going to look at some other contracts that have been out there in the past that have existed, similar money values, a little bit higher, a little bit lower. Ryan, I know you dug into a couple that you wanted to talk about. Who were three of the bigger ones for you that compared well to what Pete Alonso is looking for in that 6-year potential $135 million range?
Yeah, so we sat down and we looked at recent contracts that have been signed by first basemen. Let's start there. We then took a look at the AAV on those contracts and the age of the player when they signed the contract. Pete Alonso, as of, I believe, this week or last week, turned 30 years old, for anybody who doesn't know. Happy birthday, Pete. And we said, are these guys comparable to him from a standpoint of hitting profile and contract profile? I've already stated that the contract will fit the hitting profile, obviously a little bit more difficult. But let's go into these three contracts. The best comparable contract, in our opinion, that we found was when Chris Davis signed his 7-year, $161 million deal with the Baltimore Orioles. He signed that deal at age 29, and the AAV on that contract was $23 million. The next two that we went ahead and looked at were Paul Goldschmidt with the St. Louis Cardinals. At 32 years old, he signed a 5-year, $130 million contract at $26 million AAV. And finally, Mark Teixeira signed with the New York Yankees at 29 years old with a 8-year, $180 million contract with a $22.5 million AAV. I'd like to read off the contract that the Mets offered Pete again last year, which was 7 years, $158 million, $22.5 million AAV. Seems to fit really well in there. They've obviously ramped up to potentially $30 million in annual value. I like these contract comparisons for him. I think there's one player of the three that he compares to most production-wise, and we're going to kind of dive into that right now. But, Evan, when you look at those three players, do you feel that he's feasibly in the same category?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely right. This is a guy that's easily going to slot into the middle of your order. He's going to be a cornerstone bat, and he's going to be a first baseman, in my opinion, and I'll dig deeper into this, that you can trust to do exactly what you need him to do over at first base. Again, there are guys within these three contracts, notably Paul Goldschmidt, that are going to do more than you ask of a first baseman. Yeah. But truly, when you look at the other two, Mark Teixeira, Chris Davis, I think they slot very, very comparably on the defensive end and fit into that same profile for, let's face it, a Mets lineup that really needs that cornerstone bat.
Yeah.
To play alongside a Juan Soto.
100%. So now this begs the question, as we decide if he is worth the contracts that the Mets have currently offered to him, The biggest piece for any first baseman will always be offense. If anybody tells you anything else, they haven't been watching. You normally need your corner infielders to be middle of the order thump type bats, and they are for most teams that are competing. Pete is that. How do we compare Pete to Chris Davis, Paul Goldschmidt, and Mark Teixeira? Well, first we have to give ourselves a comparable data set. So what I did was I took a look and got each player on a full season as close to Pete Alonso's current career plate appearance as possible. So through 6 seasons, Pete Alonso has 3,607 plate appearances. So I took the other guys and I found a way to get them as close to 3,607 as I could with the data that was at my disposal. Every guy ended up between 3,500 plate appearances and 4,000 plate appearances. So we feel pretty good about the way that we're comparing these guys. So when we took all 4 of these players and we compared those numbers, how did Pete Alonso fare? Where was Pete Alonso at the cream of the crop? Where was Pete Alonso at the bottom? Pete rose to the top in 2 categories that should surprise nobody if you've had the opportunity to watch him in his first 6 years. Pete rose to the top in total home runs, which was 226. The next closest guy to him was Chris Davis at 203 home runs over 3,512 plate appearances. If you do the cross multiplication, he would have been at around 208 home runs if we get him exactly to the number of plate appearances on that rate as Pete Alonso through that time. Those were the only 2 categories of which, offensively, from a production perspective, that Pete Alonso was at the top. Where was Pete Alonso second best? Just for the sake of finding out. He was actually second best in walk rate. Something that I don't think people would have recognized against the 3 names that we put out there. Good for Pete. I think that's a really good bonus for him on what he does. Now,
He was behind Chris Davis, right?
yes. Yeah. Right. Okay. You're an Orioles fan. You got to watch Chris Davis for a long time. Chris Davis,
Yeah.
He ain't walked that much, people. Just look it up. So I like that. Let's go to the opposite side. Where did Pete Davis? Wow, look, you even got me saying he's Pete Davis. Where did Pete Alonso fall to the bottom against these 4 guys? Well, rougher than what people might expect. He was at the bottom of the table on hits, doubles, average on base percentage, and batting average on balls in play. Those aren't necessarily areas that you want to be seeing him at the bottom of. But in a small sample size, we know what Pete Alonso does better than all 3 of these guys. When you're buying Pete Alonso, you're buying home runs. So let's wrap this all into a bow when we looked at production here. Of these 3 guys, who does Pete Alonso compare the best with? The answer was pretty easy. He compares the best with Chris Davis. Pete Alonso literally comes off as a higher home run value, more walks, and less strikeouts Chris Davis. Let's throw out what happened to the end of Chris Davis's career because there was off the field factors that affected him. If Pete could continue to do this, and I told you right now he was a better Chris Davis, more home runs, less doubles, more walks, and more strikeouts, Flax, would you give him the contract that Chris Davis was given?
Yeah, 100%.
I think so too.
Yeah,
I think so
no
too.
question.
So from a production metrics perspective, I think we're willing to check the box up front that extension that was offered last year with the $22.5 million AAV was probably pretty fair. But let's take this a little bit further here. And let's go into some of those analytics and StatCast measurements that all of us love to look at. And it shows really well for Pete. Pete's got a lot of red on his Baseball Savant page when you look out, throughout time and through his career. Their little function where you can press play to see how it's changed over the years is pretty cool. Highly suggest hitting that button if you haven't. But last year, Pete Alonso had a 19 batter run value. He was 80th percentile or higher in WOBA, X slugging, barrel rate, hard hit rate, and bat speed. His career XWOBA is 362. The league average XWOBA last year was 315. Those are numbers we really like. And then when you combine that with the fact that He's always been above average in walk and chase rate, so over the 50 percentile mark. You put together a guy who's just an overall great hitter, and I think deserves the money that we're looking at here. At the end of the day, Pete Alonso, from a bat perspective, is generally going to be the 3, 4, or 5 hitter in just about every lineup in baseball. Again, prime Chris Davis, more home runs, less doubles, more walks, less strikeouts, feels like a pretty good comparable. And I think there's a really good argument to be made that 10 years ago, Alonso has already inked a contract, and it might not be with the Mets because I think other teams would have been much more aggressive when it comes to Alonso's production numbers in an era where we were not looking at nearly as many analytical stats. So, interesting situation. But to answer our first question and our second question, I think that Pete Alonso compares extremely well with first basemen who have gotten contracts in this range. And I think Pete Alonso deserves a contract probably somewhere within that $22.5 to $30 million range. The only final point to be made with his offensive production in those numbers is that, yes, the contract he was offered was 3 years, $90 million. If you want to get a superstar type bat on a shorter contract, you will always have to overpay the AAV. Guys are not going to give up years that are financial stability for them without you giving more money. It's just how this all works. Now that we've talked about the offense and why we believe Pete Alonso is worth these contracts, let's flip over to something that has been very highly debated all offseason. And that's Pete Alonso's defense, which for some reason seems to be why people believe he hasn't been signed yet. So, Flax, tell us about Pete Alonso's defense.
Yeah, and this is something that's driving me up a wall, quite honestly, because we are judging a first baseman as if he's a shortstop. Again, you said it perfectly. What are we signing a first baseman for? To be a bat. There is an average level of defense that you need your first baseman to play. But quite honestly, when you really start digging into defensive stats across Major League Baseball, even over an extended period of time, there is 1, 2, maybe 3 a year that are exceptional defenders that are going to do above and beyond. The majority are average to below average. That aside, when we start looking at defensive first basemen, we really need to understand what stats are worth looking at. When we started digging into this a little bit more, the 2 stats that a lot of people tend to use when they're trying to compare Pete Alonso to other first basemen, notably Christian Walker, Paul Goldschmidt, 2 premier elite defenders that exist in today's ballgame, they keep throwing out defensive WAR or wins above replacement, or they're talking about outs above average. And while these are really solid tools for different types of defenders, they're very bad for first basemen. So let's start with outs above average. Outs above average was built for outfielders first and foremost. They were a gauge of how well you were able to get to a baseball that was put into play. So it takes into account things like your range, your positioning, things that are much less frequently focused on for an infielder. So when we look at the factors that it still takes into account for an infielder, we're still talking about how far they have to go to get to the ball. If you're a first baseman, there's a large portion of the balls that are to your right, which would be in play for a second baseman. A lot of times, first basemen immediately retreat to the first base bag. Whether that makes them an elite defender for not doing that or a better defender for putting themselves in the right position is more a judgment of who your second baseman is. Another piece that it focuses on is on force plays, how fast the batter is on average. Well, if you're a first baseman and you're a part of a force play, all you're doing is getting yourself to the bag while the play is developing. So there's not a lot of impact that you have or that you can make on yourself when it comes to this rating. So when we look at first baseman, it's kind of a null and void stat or topic when we're comparing it against what we would see as quote unquote league average. When we start talking about OAA against first baseman to first baseman, the numbers are usually so poor that we don't talk about it to begin with. And this kind of segues us well into defensive wins above replacement. Defensive wins above replacement actually does take the position that you play into account. But what we noticed was the positional adjustment that's taken into account for first baseman is the worst positional adjustment that exists across all positions, with a negative 12.5 run value. So immediately, a standard average first baseman is starting with the baseline of negative 12.5 WAR. The positional adjustment that exists for a first baseman immediately creates a negative number. So when we start throwing out that Pete Alonso over a 6-year span has had a negative 11.5 defensive WAR, obviously we're going to look at it and say, well, why would we want a guy with that low of a negative number playing defense for us? In all actuality, if we had a shortstop with that sort of number, he wouldn't be in the league, or he wouldn't be playing that position in the league. But for a first baseman, we're talking about something that is average to slightly above average. So now that we've kind of talked through why I personally think defensive WAR and outs above average, OAA, are two poor stats to follow along with for a first baseman, let's talk about what we think are important stats for a first baseman. When I look at what I want a first baseman to be able to do, it is start double plays, finish double plays, and scoop the baseball.
Sounds about fair.
Scooping the baseball, you're immediately saving runs in my mind. You're saving pitches thrown by your pitcher. You're saving errors for your infielders and other players. And if you're turning double plays and if you're finishing double plays, you obviously have the range to make a play at first base, and you obviously have the arm to throw the ball where we ask a first baseman to throw the ball, which is usually 90 feet to second base and 90 feet to home plate. I don't need you to have a shortstop's arm to throw a guy out at the plate from the outfield. The reality of that situation is few and far between. So let's look at where Pete Alonso sits in this realm, because I want to make sure that we're comparing him to other players within the same position. So players that we look at because they're very, very good defenders are Paul Goldschmidt and Christian Walker. And when you start to look at some of the newer defensive metrics, things like range, things like fielding run value, that we're talking about not being really important, Christian Walker and Paul Goldschmidt blow him away because they do play the position closer to what you'd see a middle infielder play. They go get the ball to the right a little bit more. They do have a little bit more range. They are a little bit quicker on their feet. But when you start to look at the statistics that are important for a first baseman, double plays started, double plays turned, double plays finished, and scoops, Pete Alonso ranks in the top 5 of all first basemen within the last 6 years, including Christian Walker and Paul Goldschmidt, who he sits above. In my mind, you're talking about a first baseman who is exceptionally effective at doing the things you would ask a first baseman to do. The second thing that I think is really important of a first baseman, because there's very few chances they have that are not average chances, is how well do they do on different difficulty of plays. So when you dig into some of the older metrics, and these have shifted a little bit, so there's only so much information we have from Pete Alonso. But when we start looking at guys like Mark Teixeira and Paul Goldschmidt, 99% of the plays that these guys make are either routine, likely to be made, or at an even difficulty. Within the single year that we have those same stats for Pete Alonso, we find that to be the same thing. When we really start to dig in across a larger breadth of data set, this seems to be true across the board. Very few times are first basemen making plays that are in the realm of rarely to be made. When you look across all three of these defenders and their conversion rate across the 99% of balls hit at them, they're all par for the course. They're all making 97 to 99% of these plays. So again, I want to go back to why we're making this case for Pete Alonso. When we talk about his contract, we talk about 6 years, $135 million, that same 22.5 AAV that Mark Teixeira got back in 2009, or Chris Davis got from the Orioles. We're talking about a hitter, right? We're not talking about a defender. But when we do talk about Pete Alonso as a defender, we need to stop talking about it as a detractor for why he shouldn't get this contract. There isn't much that changed from Pete Alonso last year when he got the contract extension offer to Pete Alonso now when he still hasn't. So if the Mets were willing to give it to him before, they're probably at some point going to be willing to give it to him again. And that's probably why he didn't take the 3-year offer. We're not looking to make a case for him to win the Gold Glove. We're just simply submitting that he is an average, if not slightly above average, first baseman. Not a defender on the whole, but a first baseman. And it should not hurt his case for getting the deal that I think he deserves. So that's where I sit defensively for Pete Alonso. When you look at a lot of the chatter around baseball, that seems to be the sticking point for where they see him as a positional player. And you and I have talked about this, right? They don't want to turn him into a DH. Hitters, notably, statistically speaking, are worse hitters when they DH and they don't play the field. He is completely adequate to play the position that he plays and be a better hitter for that. So that's where I sit. I don't know if you have anything to add there, Ryan. I know being a fan of a team in the NL East, you've probably gotten a lot of opportunity to watch him as a defensive first baseman. But that this has really been the hill I've been willing to die on for the last 3 or 4 weeks as I've seen all the chatter going on amongst social media and front offices across the board.
In having the opportunity to watch Pete Alonso X amount of times a year due to being a Nationals fan, I think what scares people is that when the ball is in the air, sometimes Pete looks lost. To be honest, that seems to be it. I had a really good friend in high school who played on our team, who was a first baseman, and the kid could make every play. But sometimes when the ball was in the air, in foul territory, near the side, it would be a little bit of an adventure. A lot of times he'd still make the play. It didn't necessarily matter. The other thing that we talked about is a range-based statistic for first baseman really just doesn't make any sense to begin with.
No.
On a ball in foul territory, majority of the time, it should really probably be your second baseman or your right fielder who goes and gets that ball if they can get there. There's probably
behind
the first baseman. Apologies, behind the
first baseman. Yeah.
The ones directly to his left or in front of him we're not necessarily worried about here. He should and will make those plays. He has I believe a .992 career fielding percentage. It's not like he's making error after error after error here. So I agree with you. I think that we need to lay off Pete Alonso's defense. I think somebody needs to put him in their lineup, whether it's the Mets or somebody else. Again, 226 home runs over 6 years. He's 30 years old. Pete Alonso is tracking to hit around 450 plus home runs for his entire career. At the bare minimum, he fits in the 3 to 5 hole for you. Against analytics, he's the perfect 3-hole hitter. He grounds into more double plays than you want. The 3-hole in your lineup sees the most 2 outs, nobody on situations. So the most effective way to get a run there is for somebody to hit the ball over the fence. I think Pete Alonso deserves the money. I think Pete Alonso deserves a contract sooner than later. And I think his defense has nothing to do with it. And I think you agree as well. So there you go. Let us know how you feel about Pete Alonso. Let us know why you think Pete Alonso hasn't been signed yet. We'd love to hear a little bit more. Now that we have died on our hill, we're going to move to being the informational podcast that we tend to be. And we're going to go into some high leverage or elite high leverage guys that you may or may not know about. We're not going to worry about the Tanner Scotts, the Kenley Jansens, and the Ryan Presleys who are currently sitting around and waiting for the right team to call them and give them the right offer. But let's talk about a couple really solid high leverage arms that are on rosters who have recently broken out or recently taken roles in the back ends of certain bullpens. I'm going to go ahead and start here. I think we'll go back and forth 1-to-1 here. The first one that I want to talk about, and you'll hear me talk about the Guardians here and there because I get to watch a lot of Guardians baseball while I lived in the Cleveland area for 10 years. And that's Cade Smith. You didn't get to watch Cade Smith throw a fastball last year, which he did 69% of the time. You missed out. The guy's fastball is absolutely electric and was one of the most devastating pitches in all of baseball last year. Smith comes in with a mix of a four-seam fastball that averages 96 miles an hour, a splitter, sweeper. He's got a very normal arm slot, a little bit over the top, a little bit off the side. I would just consider it a normal arm slot for MLB pitchers from an overall standpoint, or just baseball players. What stats back up how good Cade Smith was last year? Well, he's the StatCast demon you would have expected. He has elite extension and K rate. Both were 98th percentile or better. Hitters had a 212 WOBA off of his fastball last year. The league average last year for WOBA is 310. That is almost 100-point difference. Cade Smith came in and made the guy at the plate arguably 100 points worse than what he was stepping in against a league average pitcher. The batting average against his fastball and splitter consecutively were 174 and 175. He was virtually unhittable when he threw those two pitches. And then finally, the last piece I want to harp on here is, what do we need to look out for with Cade Smith in 2025? Because relievers tend to have lots of variability, especially early on in their career, which is where Cade Smith is. Last year, what made Cade Smith so good outside of his stuff was he brought down his minor league walk rate for 9 innings down by 1 to 2 full walks. He was in the zone. And as you know, Flax, that's a huge adjustment for any pitcher to come back into the zone like that. I expect to see him continue to play at this type of level because he now should have the confidence that his fastball plays within the zone and is a true out pitch. So if he can continue to keep the walk rate down and throw that fastball 60+% of the time, I think you're going to see a really effective back end high leverage guy for the Guardians for years to come. So Cade Smith, watch out. Haven't seen him. Watch some videos. The fastball is sick. Flax, tell us about one of your guys, man.
Yeah, I like that. We're finally starting to see young guys come into the league and go from being throwers and turning into pitchers, which is fun. And I have one of those, but I'm not going to talk about him yet. The one I want to talk about is Yennier Cano. And it sure feels like a biased pick because he's an Oriole, but I think what he's done over the last 2 seasons, not being the closer, but being one of the more elite back-end arms in baseball, I wanted to put some numbers to it so people understood why he was so good. First of all, he is as elite of a ground ball thrower as it gets. When you are coming in out of the bullpen, the last thing you want to do is give up a home run. He throws 63.5% ground balls on balls put in play. 63.5%.
Did he lead the league? Do we know?
Huge number. He did not lead the league, which is crazy at that number.
Yeah, that's insane.
But it's because he's a primary sinker ball pitcher. Over 50%, he's coming out of the bullpen throwing sinkers. Now again, he's throwing from a 3/4, maybe even lower arm slot, depending on the time of year. He kind of loosens and gets a little lower as the year goes on. But again, one of the things he does really well is he keeps the ball in the yard. Over 2 seasons, 420 batted balls. He's given up 13 home runs.
Wow.
That is 3% of the batted balls that he has let see go into play have gone out for a home run, and only 2% of the total plate appearances that he's pitched against, which was somewhere around 640 plate appearances. So when you start looking at why he's so successful, why he gets the ball on the ground, it's because he throws that fastball in the 81st percentile. Throwing hard from the side is really hard to hit. And then when you combine the fact that it's not just a fastball, but it's a sinking fastball, it gets in hard on righties and it runs away from lefties. It works effectively on both, and it gives him an ability to set up a secondary pitch that's maybe not amazing, but is good enough to get swings when he starts to pitch instead of just throw. And then when you really start digging into some of his StatCast numbers, chase rate, whiff rate, and K rate are in the top 25% in baseball. That's really hard to find across guys in the bullpen. and I'll talk about this again when we, when I talk about my other arm. But it's really important to have a guy come out of the bullpen that can throw strikes and get strikeouts. It's one thing to get a lot of ground balls. It's another thing to be able to put guys away without them having to reach base or without them putting a ball in play. Because when you come in extra innings, when you come into inherited runners, you need to be able to get outs without a ball being put in play. So I love Yennier Cano. I think he's going to be another great 6th, 7th, 8th inning guy, high leverage situation, and a part of what I think is the best, if not one of the best bullpens in the AL. So that's who I've got as my first person. Who's your second guy, Ryan?
Yeah. And before I run to him, when you look at the combination of a guy who is the top 4th of the league in K rate, chase rate, and with rate, plus he has a 63% or higher ground ball rate, combination for success, right? Like you said, he's not necessarily walking a lot of people. I do believe, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, he has had some spurts with walking some people. However, when he has been good over the last 2 years, that's not part of the issue. And again, I think look at those metrics.
And I think that's also partly a product of him being one of the higher used guys in the league. When you throw from that angle and you get used 74, 75 times a year, you're naturally going to come in a little bit tired. I think some of the things they've done to the bullpen, adding Gregory Soto, adding Sir Anthony Dominguez, getting Felix Bautista back, I don't think he's going to throw nearly as much as he threw last year.
Well, and they had
so
to do
hopefully walks go down.
They had to do that for him last year because once Bautista went down, the weight that was put on Cano to succeed last year was extremely heavy. So love what he's got stuff-wise, like him, everything for the Orioles. I'm going to pivot to the San Francisco Giants and a guy who stepped onto the stage in a big way once Camilo Doval ended up having some issues down the stretch. Regardless of his 104-mile-an-hour fastball, if it's not in the zone, it doesn't help anybody. So, Ryan Walker of the San Francisco Giants. He's only thrown, I believe it's a total of 60 to 80 innings of Major League Baseball. 3/4 slot. His repertoire includes a sinker, slider, and a 4-seam fastball that I'm adding in here, but he only threw it 6 times last year. So did he really throw a 4-seam fastball? Debatable. His sinker, 95.6 miles an hour on average. He threw the sinker 55% of the time, to the slider 45% of the time. This guy, again, is your classic StatCast demon. 26 pitcher run value last year. He was 94th percentile in K rate and 84th percentile in walk rate. Love that out of the pen. The average exit velocity off of him was 86.4 miles an hour. That is minuscule and was in the 94th percentile. He has an above average ground ball rate at the major league level, which again, out of the bullpen, you absolutely love because you like the thought process that he's not going to give up a home run, and combine that ground ball rate with the fact that he plays in San Francisco, which is a large ballpark, which is exactly what Posey and his staff are going to want out of their late inning guys. How did he make the turn in 2024? Well, in 2024, he cut his home run rate in half from 2023, and he pitched 19 more innings. So he threw more and still cut his home runs per 9 in half. Additionally, in 2024, he cut his walks per 9. Oh, here we are again, talking about walks. Down by a walk and a half in 2024. Ryan Walker looks like a legit back-end arm for the San Francisco Giants for a very, very long time. I'm super excited to get to see him throw more. I love this theme of the turbo sinker getting paired up with the slider. Tunneling is an extremely big thing at the major league level right now. And especially if you're a supinator, the sinker-slider combo is absolutely killer. So, hey, like Ryan Walker, Flack's not sure if you have any thoughts on him or if you want to go right into your next guy.
No, I like the choice. I'm excited to watch him. I'm excited to see kind of what he does over a full season again.
Yeah.
My second guy is Luke Weaver.
Heck yeah.
If you paid attention to the Fall Classic, you saw him. He was the highest leverage arm for the Yankees. He will not be their closer, at least at the beginning of the season, which is crazy to say, but they traded for Devin Williams from the Brewers. which was a great move by the Yankees since they had the trade capital to be able to do that. But Luke Weaver is going to be one of their highest leverage arms. And what I really like about him is that he's truly kind of a two-pitch guy. He's got a four-seam fastball and a cutter, but he really doesn't split those two evenly. So call it one fastball and a changeup. And why I love that so much is because late in the season, late innings, I think changeups are one of the most effective off-speed pitches for a bullpen arm. It's a really easy thing to tunnel. And one of the changes that Luke Weaver made in the last couple of years that I think has allowed the success of those pitches to be improved is he dropped his arm angle almost 5 degrees, from 52 degrees to 47 degrees. It allows him to probably more easily, pronate that changeup, get a little bit more run on it, and then from that point, be able to tunnel the fastball or come from the same arm slot with that fastball and throw off hitters. That's the reason why his K rate's elite. 31.1% K rate. Again, I talked about this with Cano. High leverage arms have to be able to get strikeouts. No option. So having a second guy like a Devin Williams, who you can bring in regular season in extra inning scenarios, know that you can wait to save your closer or that you can use your closer and go to a guy like this. You have multiple options to get that strikeout, or in the playoffs, in a high leverage situation, coming in an inning when you maybe normally wouldn't, but men are on base and the right part of the lineup's up for you to come in and try and shut guys down. I think Luke Weaver is going to have a heck of a year for the Yankees. I think he's going to be in an even more comfortable role, not having the game on his shoulders, at least out of the gate. And one thing we talked about before, walks. One of the biggest things he did not do last year that is a huge change from what he did in years past. He got his whip, which is walks plus hits over innings pitched, under 1, which meant he did not walk guys. And he kept the ball out of play with batters, a lot of strikeouts. These are the types of things that you want out of a back-end high-leverage reliever. So I think Luke Weaver's going to have a big year. I'm excited for him. Not against the Orioles, but in general for him.
How do we feel about the fact that the potential 8th and 9th inning guys, regardless of how the Yankees decide to put them on the field?
Be careful what you ask here, because I'm going to give you a good answer.
I know you are. How do we feel about the fact that both of their best pitches are changeups with relative profile? Devin Williams' changeup obviously has arguably the most movement in baseball, but do we feel like there could be a disadvantage to the fact that neither of them are wipeout sliders and then you have a different out pitch moving the other direction?
I think it just changes how you utilize these guys. I think there's also other arms that Aaron Boone can shift within the meat of a competitor's or an opponent's order, right? More than likely, if you're going to see the heart of an order in a tough situation in the 7th, there's a potential you could see them again in the 9th. So maybe you bring in Luke Weaver in the 7th and you back end it with Devin Williams in the 9th. I don't necessarily worry about that so much. I still think the changeup is one of the most devastating pitches in baseball. If you had two guys that were throwing sliders that only had wipe away sliders, I think I'd be more worried. But the changeup is meant to look like the fastball. So it's basically, to me, saying I've got two guys that throw hard and throw a pitch that's going to look the exact same and potentially drop under the bat. I can throw that pitch whenever I want to whoever I want. And the likelihood that they're going to catch on from two different guys from two different arm slots with two slightly different changeup movements is pretty low.
Okay.
Especially in the heat of the moment, back end of a game. These guys would have to do a ton of work to really feel like they had a good understanding. There's a reason why these two guys were both really successful last year. They throw really good pitches. I mean, look, Luke Weaver came out of the bullpen right after Tommy Canley.
Yep.
Tommy Canley
only throws
threw
changeups.
75 straight changeups in the playoffs. Then Luke Weaver came in, also threw fastballs and changeups, and had no problem. So
I like that
example.
example.
Depends on how you use them.
I like that example. I think I'd probably be more worried if it was mainly slider guys, as you said. But was curious to your thoughts. So
I thought you were going to say how does the AL East feel about that 8-9, and I was going to say I think the Orioles 8-9 is better, but you didn't ask the question.
I also think the Orioles 8-9 is better, but many of you did not get to watch Felix Bautista last year. Actually, all of us didn't because he was hurt. And wait till you see that come out of the pen if you haven't got to see him play yet. So I would tend to agree. Let's keep ourselves moving here. A little bit more of a fun topic for us as we close this thing down. Let's get back to the Evan Flax special. Will they, won't they? And
round 2.
Yeah, round 2. I'm still throwing splinkers at 94 miles an hour. I don't know what Flax is going to throw at me today, but
certainly not.
Come on, man. All right, I will. I'm gonna go first here with one that I really, really like, and that is going to be over under 70 stolen bases for Ellie De La Cruz.
Over. And I'll tell you why.
Yes, please do.
Because Tito's going to teach him how to take a major league at bat, and he's just going to get on base more. As long as he gets on base more. I mean, listen, for a guy that got on base at a solid rate but could be better, he had 67 last year. I have no reason to believe he's not going to have a higher OBP and steal more bases.
I like it. I think you're probably right, too. I think there's so much room for him to improve as it pertains to his on-base capabilities, and Tito is the right guy to help shepherd him there. I'm sure the staff around Tito is extremely good as well.
Yeah. Okay, I got one. I got one for you, and it's a name that might throw you off. Bryce Terang, over under 50 stolen bases.
Just so everybody can see, my second option was Bryce Terang over under 60 stolen bases. I'd like to show that to everybody for proof. I got Bryce Terang over 50 stolen bases next year. I think Terang continues to improve from an overall standpoint. Wow. I also think he continues to hit high in the lineup, probably their leadoff guy. He improved in 2024 over his 2023. I would personally take Bryce Terang over 60 because I think that's the type of season he's going to have. Love the name. Love the poll. That's a good one. Yeah. Oh boy. If we have the same things on the next one, people are going to stop believing us. But I wrote it all down.
There's no way.
And we don't have it in our outlines that we make, which is what we try to do to stump each other here. We just have what the will they, won't they will be. So, Evan, you get to start this one, and it's going to be for strikeouts.
Yes. Over under 120 strikeouts, Trevor Rogers.
I'm gonna say under because I don't think he's gonna throw enough. I don't think he's gonna throw enough to get to the number. I think the Orioles have the ability to turn Trevor Rogers' career over and really make him a good arm. However, I also know that they have multiple guys who will be coming back sometime middle of the year, including one Kyle Bradish. Rogers' ability to throw well very early is what's going to keep him a rotation spot.
Yeah,
with what they have. Yes, with what they have, I'm not sure he's going to get there. I'm going to go under, not because I don't like the player, but because I don't think the situation is going to be what he needs to get to 120 strikeouts.
I like that. I think that's realistic.
It might be. I mean, I want him to be over for your sake, so, you know.
Yeah, I mean, they've got plenty of depth now that they signed Charlie Morton, so.
Absolutely. 41-year-old Charlie Morton. Good arm, though.
Making the same thing as Alex Cobb.
All right. Over under 170 strikeouts for Kumar Rocker.
Oh. I'm going to say over.
I like it.
Because Kumar Rocker's going to win AL Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, he is.
And he's going to start 30-plus games. And Kumar Rocker is too good of a pitcher not to hit the over. You said 170?
170.
Yeah, not to go over 170 strikeouts. Come on, no question.
I would have to agree. My other one, for sake of doing it, since I already showed you guys my card, was Michael King over 200. I went away from that because Flax would have said that's 100% going to happen, guaranteed, because he already has his money on Michael King winning NL Rookie of the Year. Or sorry, Cy Young. My bad.
I do already have my money on that. I think it was plus plus 2,000. And I still feel good about it. So, you know what's crazy is Jacob deGrom had better odds at 37 and not having pitched a full season in 2 years, but that's okay. The other one I was going to do was Corbin Burns over under 200 strikeouts, because it's been a couple of years since he has had a 200 strikeout season. But
I bet you he gets there.
I decided not to go with a high profile guy.
I bet you he gets there. I like that. I like that a lot, actually, for him. I think he's going to throw really well in Arizona. I think he has the proverbial dad powers that are going to push him through this season.
It's got that dad strength.
Yeah, dude. When you make the decision to stay home,
yeah,
to be near your twins, I have to believe you're going to have probably the best season of your career. So good on Corbin Burns.
Yeah, he was going to be good no matter where he decided to go. Let's clear that up.
Closing remarks as always here. Not a ton on my front from you guys today. We did recently just started posting all of our articles on Twitter as well. We know that's a really good forum for people and an easy place to have them reach. So not only are we on WordPress, but you will see all of our articles now coming out on Twitter. Definitely like, follow, subscribe, all those different things on the socials, and we appreciate the support that we've been getting, and we're going to continue to pump out as much quality content as we possibly can. And again, thank you so much for the support that we've received so far. Flax, closing statements, closing arguments.
Click the button. Click that follow button. We appreciate the support, and be on the lookout for those articles. We're going to write about a lot of different things. I just polished off the pitcher injury report recap.
Great article.
That should be coming out pretty soon here out on Twitter.
Awesome. Well, look, we appreciate you guys as always. This has been Baseball Unstitched. Have a great week.
Peace.